The secret practices of ancient Egypt were far more horrifying than you imagine. Behind the golden death masks and magnificent pyramids that have captivated our imagination for millennia lay rituals so disturbing that even the priests who performed them swore oaths of silence that lasted beyond death itself. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the world's most mysterious civilization, revealing a shadowy realm where the line between life and death dissolved into something far more terrifying than mere mortality. The year was 1323 before Christ, and the corridors of the great temple of Karnak echoed with the rhythmic chanting of priests performing their daily ablutions. But on this particular evening during the festival of Opet, a different sound would soon fill the sacred chambers. The muffled screams of the chosen ones, echoing from the hidden chambers beneath the temple complex, where tourists would never be permitted to venture. What transpired in those subterranean halls was not merely religious ceremony, but a systematic exploration of human consciousness that would make modern neuroscientists question everything they believed about the boundaries between science and mysticism. The popular imagination has sanitized ancient Egyptian religion into something almost noble, a dignified journey toward eternal life guided by benevolent gods and protective amulets. But the reality was far more sinister and infinitely more complex. The priests of ancient Egypt possessed knowledge about human physiology, consciousness, and the manipulation of perception that wouldn't be rediscovered by Western science until the 20th century. Today, we strip away the romanticized veil of Hollywood depictions and examine the unflinching reality of practices so advanced and disturbing that they were deliberately erased from official records. To understand the true horror of Egypt's secret practices, we must first grasp the world that created them. Ancient Egypt, during the New Kingdom, was not merely a civilization obsessed with death, but a society that had developed an unprecedented understanding of the human body and mind. The priests who served in the great temples were not just religious figures, but master anatomists, chemists, and psychologists who had spent decades perfecting techniques that could alter human consciousness in ways that bordered on the supernatural. Unlike other ancient civilizations that viewed the body as merely a vessel for the soul, Egyptian priests understood that consciousness itself could be manipulated through precise physiological interventions. Their medical papyri, the few that survived the systematic destruction ordered by later dynasties, reveal knowledge of surgical procedures, pharmaceutical preparations, and psychological techniques that wouldn't be matched in sophistication until the modern era. But these public documents represented only the surface of their capabilities. The high priests of Thoth, god of wisdom and magic, had developed what they called the sacred sciences, a collection of practices that combined medicine, chemistry, and what we might recognize today as advanced psychology. These techniques were so closely guarded that initiates underwent procedures that physically prevented them from revealing the secrets even under torture. Ancient accounts describe priests whose tongues had been ritually scarred in patterns that made certain sounds impossible to produce, ensuring that specific incantations could never be spoken outside the sacred chambers. The transformation of novice priests into full initiates required a process that modern observers would recognize as systematic psychological conditioning, combined with chemical alteration of consciousness. Young men selected for the priesthood, typically from noble families, underwent a series of increasingly intense rituals that permanently altered their perception of reality. Contemporary accounts from Greek travelers describe encountering Egyptian priests whose eyes had an unusual quality, as if they were seeing something invisible to others, and whose speech carried an otherworldly cadence that seemed to bypass rational thought entirely. The initial stages of priestly initiation involved what the Egyptians termed the death of the mundane mind. Candidates were sealed in specially constructed chambers beneath the temples for periods lasting up to 40 days, during which they received carefully measured doses of substances extracted from plants that grew only in the most remote regions of the Nile Delta. These compounds, whose exact composition remains unknown despite extensive chemical analysis of residues found in sealed jars, produced experiences that initiates described as journeys into the realm of the gods themselves. But the chemical alterations were only the beginning. The priests had developed surgical techniques that allowed them to make precise modifications to the human body without causing death or obvious disfigurement. Ancient surgical instruments found in priest burials include tools so specialized that modern surgeons struggle to determine their purpose. Some appear designed for procedures involving the nasal cavity and the base of the skull, suggesting interventions that could affect the brain directly without leaving external evidence. The most disturbing discoveries have come from the examination of mummified priests whose bodies show evidence of surgical modifications that served no apparent medical purpose. X-ray analysis has revealed metal implants in locations that correspond to major nerve centers, while others show evidence of procedures that would have required knowledge of human anatomy that supposedly wasn't developed until the Renaissance. These physical modifications appear to have been performed on living subjects, as the bone healing patterns indicate the priests survived the procedures and lived for years afterward. The secret chambers beneath Egypt's major temples housed libraries that contained the true records of these practices. Unlike the publicly displayed hieroglyphic inscriptions that spoke of gods and mythology, these hidden archives were written in a modified script that required not just literacy, but specific training to decode. The few fragments that survived the systematic destruction ordered by Ptolemy II reveal practices so advanced that scholars initially dismissed them as fantasy, until archaeological evidence began to corroborate the most incredible claims. Among the most significant discoveries was a sealed chamber beneath the Temple of Dendera that contained what appeared to be a complete laboratory for the manipulation of human consciousness. The room included apparatus for distilling complex chemical compounds, surgical instruments arranged with surgical precision, and most disturbing of all, a series of stone tables with restraining mechanisms that showed clear evidence of prolonged use. Chemical analysis of stains on these surfaces revealed traces of substances that modern science recognizes as powerful hallucinogens, but in combinations and concentrations that suggest knowledge of neuropharmacology that wouldn't be achieved elsewhere for thousands of years. The priests used these techniques not just for religious purposes, but as tools of political control. Ancient administrative records, written in demotic script and hidden among mundane bureaucratic documents, describe a network of individuals throughout Egyptian society who had undergone procedures that made them unusually susceptible to specific forms of suggestion. These modified individuals occupied positions throughout the government, military and merchant classes, creating a hidden control system that allowed the priesthood to manipulate Egyptian society with unprecedented precision. The process of creating these human assets involved procedures that combined surgical intervention with psychological conditioning and chemical modification. Subjects, often selected from prisoners of war or condemned criminals, underwent operations that altered their brain function in ways that made them highly responsive to certain stimuli, while leaving their basic personality and capabilities apparently unchanged. Contemporary observers described individuals who seemed perfectly normal in most circumstances, but who would experience dramatic personality changes when exposed to specific combinations of sounds, scents, or visual patterns. The Egyptian understanding of human psychology extended to techniques for extracting information that wouldn't be matched in sophistication until the 20th century. Rather than relying on crude torture, Their priests developed methods that could access memories and knowledge that subjects weren't even consciously aware they possessed. These interrogation techniques combined chemical compounds that lowered psychological resistance with carefully choreographed sensory experiences that could induce states of consciousness where the boundary between memory and imagination became permeable. Surviving accounts from foreign diplomats describe witnessing demonstrations where Egyptian priests appeared to extract detailed information about distant lands and events from individuals who had never traveled beyond their local village. The accuracy of this intelligence was verified through independent sources, suggesting that the priests had developed techniques for accessing what modern psychology might recognize as inherited or collective memory patterns. The methods used to achieve these results were so closely guarded that even high-ranking government officials were unaware of their existence. The most horrifying aspect of Egypt's secret practices was their experimentation with what they called consciousness transfer. Ancient texts describe procedures that supposedly allowed the personality and memories of dying individuals to be preserved and transferred to other bodies. While this sounds like pure fantasy, archaeological evidence suggests that the Egyptians were conducting systematic experiments in this area for centuries. Tombs of certain high-ranking priests contain multiple bodies with identical surgical modifications, while chemical analysis reveals evidence of procedures that would have required the subjects to be alive during the most invasive phases. The priests developed what they believed was a complete map of human consciousness, identifying specific regions of the brain responsible for different aspects of personality, memory, and perception. Their surgical techniques were sophisticated enough to allow them to make precise modifications to these regions while keeping the subject alive and conscious throughout the procedure. The psychological impact of these experiments on the subjects was apparently considered irrelevant, as surviving texts discuss the procedures with the same clinical detachment that might be used to describe the preservation of livestock. During the festival of Sokar, when the boundary between the living and dead was believed to be thinnest, the priests conducted their most advanced experiments. These ceremonies took place in specially constructed underground chambers that had been designed to amplify certain acoustic frequencies while eliminating others. The combination of architectural acoustics, chemical compounds, and surgical modifications created environments where individuals could experience states of consciousness that the priests interpreted as communication with the dead. Foreign observers who were permitted to witness modified versions of these ceremonies reported experiences so profound that many never recovered their normal psychological equilibrium. Roman dignitaries described visions so vivid and detailed that they became convinced they had actually traveled to other realms. Some returned to Rome as changed individuals, abandoning their previous lives to become devotees of Egyptian mysteries, while others suffered complete psychological breakdowns and spent their remaining years in states that modern medicine would recognize as severe dissociative disorders. The priests had also developed techniques for what they called soul extraction, procedures that could supposedly separate the consciousness from the body while keeping both alive. These experiments required the most advanced surgical skills the Egyptians possessed, as they involved interventions in the brainstem and spinal cord that would be considered extremely dangerous even with modern medical technology. Surviving subjects of these procedures exhibited symptoms that contemporary observers described as living death, remaining physically alive but showing no signs of normal consciousness or personality. The purpose of these experiments appears to have been the creation of what the priests called vessels of knowledge, individuals whose consciousness had been replaced with carefully constructed personalities designed to serve specific functions. These human constructs were used as living libraries, repositories of information that could be accessed through specific procedures but which remained hidden under normal circumstances. The creation of each vessel required months of preparation and surgical intervention, followed by years of psychological conditioning and chemical treatment. As Egypt's power began to wane during the late period, the priests recognized that their secret knowledge faced extinction. Rather than allow their techniques to fall into foreign hands, they initiated what historical records describe as the Great Concealment. This systematic destruction of evidence involved not just the burning of documents, but the deliberate collapse of underground chambers, the execution of lower-ranking priests who possessed partial knowledge, and most disturbingly, the modification of surviving high priests to make them incapable of revealing secrets even under torture. The few priests who survived this purge were subjected to procedures that altered their brain function in ways that made them incapable of communicating their knowledge through normal means. Ancient accounts describe individuals who retained their general intelligence and personality, but who became unable to discuss certain topics without experiencing what appeared to be severe physical distress. Modern analysis of mummified priests from this period reveals evidence of surgical modifications to regions of the brain associated with speech and memory formation. Archaeological investigations conducted during the 20th century uncovered evidence that many of Egypt's greatest monuments concealed hidden chambers designed for purposes that had nothing to do with burial or religious worship. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques have revealed complex underground networks beneath sites like the Giza Plateau, Saqqara, and Karnak. Many of these chambers remain sealed, either because they are inaccessible or because governments have classified their contents as too sensitive for public knowledge. When chambers have been opened, the discoveries have often been so disturbing that detailed information has been suppressed. Reports from official excavations describe finding human remains that show evidence of surgical procedures so advanced that they challenge conventional understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities. Some bodies appear to have been subjected to experimental procedures while alive, while others show modifications that would have required knowledge of human anatomy that supposedly didn't exist at the time. The chemical analysis of residues found in these chambers has revealed compounds that modern science recognizes as powerful psychoactive substances, but in combinations that suggest knowledge of neuropharmacology far in advance of what should have been possible. Some of these compounds affect brain function in ways that weren't understood by Western science until the late 20th century, raising questions about how ancient civilizations could have developed such sophisticated understanding of human consciousness. Perhaps most disturbing are the artistic depictions found in the sealed chambers that show procedures being performed on clearly living subjects. Unlike the stylized religious art found in public areas of temples and tombs, these images are rendered with anatomical precision that suggests they were created as instructional materials. The level of detail includes aspects of human physiology that weren't officially discovered until modern times, while the procedures depicted would be considered experimental even by contemporary medical standards. The priest's understanding of human psychology extended to techniques for manipulating collective consciousness on a societal level. Evidence suggests they developed methods for introducing ideas and behavioral patterns into large populations without the subjects being aware of the manipulation. These techniques involved the systematic use of architectural acoustics, carefully composed musical intervals, and the strategic placement of specific visual symbols that could influence subconscious mental processes. The design of major Egyptian monuments appears to incorporate these psychological manipulation techniques on a massive scale. The pyramids, temples, and sphinx complexes were positioned and constructed according to mathematical principles that created specific psychological effects in individuals who visited or lived near them. Modern analysis has revealed that these structures generate infrasound frequencies known to affect human brain function, while their visual proportions correspond to mathematical relationships that influence perception in ways that weren't understood by Western science until recently. The priests also developed what they called generational conditioning, techniques for introducing behavioral modifications that would be passed down through family lines without conscious awareness. This involved the systematic modification of individuals who would become parents, ensuring that certain psychological traits and susceptibilities would appear in their descendants. Evidence for these practices comes from the analysis of family lineages in ancient Egyptian records, which show unusual patterns of behavior and capability that appear to have been artificially induced rather than naturally inherited. The collapse of Egypt's secret knowledge system had consequences that extended far beyond the loss of individual techniques or technologies. Modern analysis suggests that the Egyptians had developed what might be considered a complete science of consciousness, a systematic understanding of how the human mind functions and how it can be modified or controlled. The destruction of this knowledge set back human understanding of psychology and neuroscience by potentially thousands of years. Some scholars have suggested that fragments of Egyptian consciousness manipulation techniques survived and influenced later mystery schools and esoteric traditions throughout the Mediterranean world. The techniques described in certain Hermetic texts show similarities to procedures found in Egyptian archaeological sites, while some early Christian and Gnostic practices appear to incorporate modified versions of Egyptian psychological manipulation methods. The question that haunts modern researchers is how much of this knowledge might still exist in hidden archives or among secret societies that trace their origins to ancient Egypt. Recently declassified government documents from various nations reference investigations into claims that certain groups possess knowledge derived from ancient Egyptian sources. While most of these investigations concluded that the claims were unfounded, some files remain classified, suggesting that authorities found evidence too sensitive for public release. Archaeological work in Egypt continues to uncover evidence that challenges conventional understanding of ancient Egyptian capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified numerous sealed chambers beneath known monuments, while satellite imaging has revealed geometric patterns in the landscape that appear artificial but serve no obvious practical purpose. Many of these discoveries are not publicized due to concerns about their implications for our understanding of human history and development. The Egyptian secret practices represent perhaps history's most advanced exploration of human consciousness, conducted with a combination of scientific precision and complete disregard for human welfare that makes modern ethical standards seem primitive by comparison. The priests of ancient Egypt treated human beings as experimental subjects in a vast research project aimed at understanding and controlling the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Their success in developing techniques that could modify personality, extract information, and manipulate perception suggests capabilities that modern science is only beginning to understand. The systematic destruction of this knowledge represents one of history's greatest losses, but also perhaps one of its greatest mercies. The power to manipulate human consciousness with the precision achieved by the Egyptian priests would be dangerous in any era, but particularly so in our modern world where such techniques could be applied on a global scale. The fact that this knowledge was deliberately destroyed rather than preserved suggests that even its creators recognized its potential for catastrophic misuse. Yet tantalizing hints remain buried in the sands of Egypt, waiting for archaeologists brave enough to uncover them and governments willing to acknowledge their implications. The sealed chambers beneath the great monuments, the encrypted texts hidden in museum archives, and the strange modifications found in mummified remains all point toward a civilization that achieved understanding of human consciousness far beyond anything we have accomplished today. As we continue to probe the mysteries of ancient Egypt, we must ask ourselves whether we are prepared to confront knowledge that its original possessors found too dangerous to preserve. What other secrets lie buried beneath the desert sands, and what would happen to our world if they were finally brought into the light?